to you all, and thank you for joining this webinar session. My name is Arad Parsi, and I am Head of Business Development at Suzy Lamplugh Trust. I'm joined by my colleague Helen Burrows, who's our Training and Marketing Officer. Over the next 20 to 25 minutes or so, we will be looking at how organizations benefit from personal safety training. There will be a chance, of course, to address any questions that you may have in relation to the slides. However, please feel free to also use the chat box to pass your questions over to us. Helen will be picking these up throughout the session. If we can answer them as we're going along, then that's even better. If not, then we'll certainly come back to them towards the end of the webinar. As far as the agenda for the day is concerned, obviously we'll be looking at an introduction to Suzy Lamplugh Trust, the work that we do, who we are, what we do in the sector. What is personal safety training, and obviously who benefits from undertaking such training. In relation to why organizations commission training, we'll be looking at the legal argument, but also human cost and cost of business overall. We'll then certainly have a look at some of the more common desired outcomes that companies look for when they commission training, and we will also have a look at some testimonials. Now, Suzy Lamplugh Trust is the UK's pioneering personal safety charity. We were established in 1986 following the disappearance of 25-year-old Suzy Lamplugh, an estate agent and obviously a lone worker who went to meet a client and never returned. She was missing and assumed murdered for 7 years, eventually being declared dead in 1993. Within 6 months of her disappearance, the trust was set up, and since then it's pioneered personal safety as a life skill and a public policy priority. On the day that she went missing, Suzy had an appointment with a Mr. Kipper at 12:40 to show him a property in Fulham in West London. She left the office as usual and went on to get on with her day. But unfortunately, none of her colleagues, not even her line manager, actually noticed that she was not back at work for some time. In fact, she was reported missing to the police at 6:45 early evening, whereas she had left the office probably about 12:20 midday. So it's a considerable lapse of time in anybody noticing that she wasn't there. As I said earlier, the trust was set up 6 months. Within 6 months after Suzy's disappearance, and 33 years on, we are widely regarded as field experts in lone working and personal safety training, and the trust continues really to work towards reducing the risk of harassment, violence, and aggression through education, through campaigns, and through supporting people. Giving them the tools that they need to take the steps to avoid, mitigate, or manage risk in the workplace and outside of the workplace across all aspects of their lives. So what do we do? Essentially, and I can probably go on about this because there are loads of examples, but I'm just very quickly going to tell you a little bit about those three headings. We deliver personal safety training across various sectors and industries under the education banner. And through our consultancy provisions, we work with organizations across the public, private, and voluntary sectors to help them either amend or update or even actually introduce their personal safety policies. We campaign heavily in relation to both personal safety and stalking. Suzy Lamplugh Trust's longest running campaign has been the licensing of the operators and drivers of minicabs and private hire vehicles, which started really back in 1998. So that's been an ongoing campaign and our longest running campaign. We also have a long history of working with the stalking and harassment sector, working in conjunction with many stalking victims, as well as services. And the trust campaigning and policy work has been pivotal to changes in legislation and practice nationally. To give you some examples of that, the introduction of the Protection from Harassment Act 1997, the Protection of Freedoms Act 2012, but also more recently the stalking protection orders that have gone through the Parliament. We also, under the support banner there, it's worth mentioning that we run the National Stalking Helpline, which was established in 2010. The first service really of its kind that we know of anywhere in the world, but certainly since then, nationally within the UK, we have responded to more than 30,000 victims of stalking over the last 9 years coming through. So what is personal safety training? In order to answer this question, it's actually quite helpful to first consider what we mean by personal safety. The Suzy Lamplugh Trust's definition of personal safety is an individual's ability to go about their everyday life free from the threats or fear of psychological, emotional, or physical harm from others. And that's written out on that first bullet point for you. In practical terms, what does that mean? Well, personal safety training is about reducing the potential of becoming a victim of harassment, aggression, and violence, as we pointed out earlier. The practicality of that statement, of that first bullet point, is to be able to reduce the prevalence of harassment, aggression, and violence as much as possible. How do we achieve that? Well, through the training courses that we offer. The workshops lead to greater awareness of risk, and this is so that delegates who attend the course learn to acknowledge risk first and foremost, and not be either oblivious or hypersensitive towards it, but instead feel confident in their own ability to address and manage risk. Workshops also lead to in-depth understanding of the psychology and causes of aggression, setting boundaries around aggression and violence, and learning practical ways of dynamic risk assessment and conflict management. And finally, they certainly lead to delegates feeling more confident in managing their own personal safety, as the feedback that we receive from the workshops go on to suggest. Suzy's mother, late mother, Diana Lamplugh, used to say that personal safety is common sense, but regretfully it is not common practice. And this is why the courses that are offered by Suzy Lamplugh Trust are designed to drive changes in behavior, so that common sense does become common practice. And hopefully that helps people better look after their personal safety, and it better safeguards them. As far as who benefits from personal safety training, it's useful to consider that this early stage, who in your organization could potentially benefit from personal safety training, and then see if anyone that you have in mind may match any of the headings that we've mentioned. And these examples are purely examples, it's not a comprehensive list, but the more common sort of groups are lone workers. And it's important to clarify that by lone workers, we mean those who work by themselves without close or direct supervision, according to the Health and Safety Executive's definition of what lone working is. Now, working alone is not in itself against the law, and it's often perfectly safe to do so, but the law requires employers to consider carefully and then deal with any health and safety risks that people who are lone workers may face as a part of their everyday remit. Another example is frontline staff, who of course have extensive interactions with customers or the public, people behind the counter, people who answer telephones, receptionists, those who work in sales, marketing, customer services roles. They're all technically classified as frontline workers, and they are all client-facing. And other examples would be employees who, unfortunately, as a part of their job, are subject to regular harassment, aggression, and violence from either clients or all members of the public. The emergency forces, security guards, community, mental health, or accident and emergency nurses, doctors, and carers. People who work within housing associations, for example. Those are all examples of people who probably get more of that aggression and violence in comparison to some of the other jobs out there. Following on from that, all employees who are client-facing and do have a client-facing role, but also anyone who travels locally, nationally, or internationally as a part of their job, they require personal safety training. And of course, people who arrive very early or late, or leave fairly late in the evening, arrive early in the morning and leave later in the evening. Even if that's not an occurrence, but it happens throughout certain times of the year, those people again are lone workers, so they are, as lone workers, exposed to risk, and they would benefit from personal safety training. As I said earlier, these are just some examples, so it's certainly worth having a look and considering who in your organisation could benefit from personal safety training. So why commission personal safety training? There are 3 reasons that we'll be covering in this webinar. The first one, and to begin with, will be the legal requirements. Now, the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, and in addition to it, the Management of Health and Safety at Work Regulations 1999, very clearly make employees legally responsible for adequate provision of personal safety training. In fact, the Management of Health and Safety at Work Regulation 1999 goes on to say that employers must consider the risks to employees, including the risk of reasonably foreseeable violence, decide how significant these risks are, decide what can be done in order to be able to prevent them, and then on the back of that, develop a clear management plan to be able to achieve that. So staying on that topic of why commission personal safety training, another reason and why it's important to commission personal safety training is the prevalence of harassment, aggression and violence in the workplace, as we have mentioned so far. It's worth looking at the latest stats, I suppose, according to the Crime Survey for England and Wales 2017-18, which highlights that an estimated 1.5% of the working adults population within England and Wales became victims of one or more violent incidents. That went up from 1.3% year on year. 374,000 adults of working age experienced violence at work, including threats and physical assaults. 694,000 incidents of violence at work was estimated to have taken place, with 330,000 of them actually being physical assaults, direct assaults on workers. And that number of 694,000 had an uplift year on year of 52,000. It rose from 642,000 in the previous year. So to put it into a little bit more context as well, 1.4% of women and 1.5% of men were victims of violence at work on one or more occasions in that previous year. Now, if you look at the last bullet point, that's quite interesting because it says 54% of workplace violence offenders were strangers. The remaining 46%, the offender was known, and they were most likely to be either clients or members of the public known through work. Now, in relation to that last point, reporting, how to best report, putting in sort of measures and filters to be able to get employees to adequately report incidents and what we call near misses is a core takeaway for all delegates who attend the training workshops with Suzy Lamplugh Trust. It's not hard to see how adequate reporting could help raise greater awareness amongst employees of clients or members of the public who tend to regularly pose a risk, so that through that reporting and through that awareness raising, staff can mitigate accordingly and consider how to best deal with such individuals. But actually, first and foremost, have an awareness that this person has posed a risk, has had misbehaviors in the past with other staff members, so therefore I need to be aware of it. Even that in itself is helpful in trying to mitigate and manage risk rather than be taken by the element of surprise. The next slide looks at why commission personal training. Again, that's in relation to staff, to employees themselves. In the previous slides, we looked at why organisations commission personal safety training and covered the legal basis, as well as the prevalence of aggression and violence affecting the workplace, and we looked at the stats. But this slide is more about looking at the cost to individuals, and as you can see, things like feeling fearful, confused, angry, lack of concentration, lower self-esteem, mental health, PTSD, depression, anxiety. Those are all unfortunately things that tend to follow incidents of aggression and violence in the workplace. This often leads to adopting or developing an increased dependency on drugs for individuals who go through that fear, that shock element, that anger that results that comes about as a result of an incident of aggression and violence. So people could develop an increased dependency on alcohol and smoking or overeating. And it may very well lead to greater problems across their both the personal and professional lives. And we certainly have come across a very large number of cases where people have had to leave a job after 30 years, a job that they very much love to do, because they couldn't mentally deal with it after an incident. Of course, that's the human cost, or that's just the tip of the iceberg. As for cost of business, well, it's not hard to see how what we've just described can lead to lack of productivity in the workplace, people taking time off sick, missed deadlines, greater pressures on other teams and colleagues, staff retention issues for the organization, as well as sort of a bad reputation, which is almost very regrettable for certain organizations at times, leading to difficulties in recruiting and keeping talent. And this last slide here in relation to why it's useful to commission personal safety training, we actually took an example from the NHS to be able to, from a cost to business point of view, just highlight that in financial terms using some stats and numbers. As you can see, between 2013 and 2018, the NHS has spent £53.4 million settling assault claims, and that's broken down into just over 26 million paid in damages, nearly enough 6.5 million in defence costs, and again, nearly enough £21 million in claimant costs. The average payout was £23,000 to individuals, and I think there were just over 1,200 cases of them. Now, if you looked at that sum of money, £53.4 million, that equates to recruiting 1,700 registered nurses for 1 year. So you can see how far that would go, actually. The report was published by NHS Resolution, and it clearly outlines the changing physical and psychological effects on individuals. And unfortunately, it does refer to one tragic loss of life in that period of 5 years between 2013 and 2018. It goes on also to say that staff are more inclined to leave, and it's more difficult to attract and retain talent. And of course, it goes on to say that out of the 4 common factors that it names, one of them is inadequate evidence of staff de-escalation training. So this is why the NHS and various trusts across the country are working with us, and I've started to, we've certainly worked with some in the past, and we've done various bits and pieces with them, including consultancy and personal safety training, but others are coming forward because they do want to address these issues, and they do want to be able to upskill their staff in order to be able to mitigate and manage risk, reduce, mitigate, and manage risk. So as far as the desired outcomes is concerned, and why companies come to us and what they often communicate to us that they do get out of these personal safety training workshops, providing employees who are at risk with personal safety training, giving them the tools and knowledge for dynamic risk assessment and conflict management training, obviously we know helps to reduce the prevalence of these incidents, but it also allows the employees to be able to mitigate and manage risks where things do go wrong. Changing personal behaviors is very key. Staff are better equipped to avoid risk and conflict, but also retainment of knowledge is higher, and sustainability of practices are also higher. Helping to change the culture, so that staff employees begin to look after their own personal safety on daily basis, carrying out pre-assessments, in-the-moment assessments, and so forth all the time. But what's important is that change in behavior is not just an individual thing, but it's also a collective matter. So they start to also look out for each other's personal safety. And finally, giving employees the skills to set boundaries around aggression and violence, giving them the confidence to draw the line at some stage and say, no, I can't have this happening because this is going to lead to some sort of a physical or psychological damage to me. So those are often the desired outcomes that, as I said, we hear of as far as our clinicians are concerned and what they tell us. That last slide I'm not going to obviously read through. Just important to say that, as I've said earlier, we do work across the public, private and third sector organisations. We trained around 5,000 delegates last year, and some of the organisations that we've worked with, their names are mentioned there for you. I certainly hope that this has been useful for you. And should you have any queries or any requests that we can help with, please do feel free to contact us at the Trust. You can contact the training department by calling 0207 091 0014. You can certainly go back to the first slide, and my email address should be there, but also info@suzylamplugh.org is the other generic email that you can send your queries to, and we will be more than happy to help. I think we'll wrap up here. Thank you very much for your time. I wish you a good day, and look forward to hearing from you in due course with your queries. Thank you.